All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm Robert Strand, and I'm with my good colleague and friend Faris Natour here, and we have the good fortune of being able to discuss advancing human rights in business this morning. And before we get started, though, I'm very interested here. Just a show of hands. Berkeley alumni. Can I see?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome home, and also I have a sense that if you chose to come to a lecture on a Saturday morning, I think we've got the A students who are in the audience with us, so we've got a little bit of pressure on us to perform here, Ferris. And with that, I'd like to invite, we'd like this to be a conversation. So Ferris and I will discuss a bit about what we're working on here at Berkeley-Haas and across UC Berkeley more broadly speaking with the human rights and business agenda. And, but we want to have a conversation with you also, so there'll certainly be plenty of time at the end of our time together, and we're going until 11:30. Okay, so 11:30, and so we'll certainly have plenty of time here just after 11 o'clock where we'll open up for questions, so please do, we're looking forward to hearing from you also. So if I could, I'll say a word about myself, and then Ferris, if you'd kindly offer a word about you, and then I've got a couple questions that I'd like to pose.
Yeah.
So again, I'm Robert Strand, and for the last 2 years have the privilege of being the executive director of the Center for Responsible Business, and that's based here at Haas and has been around for over a dozen years. And I think it's the center's legacy and success is a testament to Berkeley being a special place, and a place that has a long tradition as the university and just the ethos of a progressive, social justice-minded mindset. And that's something that we attempt to advance with the Center for Responsible Business. We oversee curriculum, we seed research, and we help to put on events. And one of the things that I'm particularly excited about is the fact that we're home for the Human Rights in Business Initiative. And it's something that I would argue, and I'm sure Ferris will be able to articulate, is something that's just, it's so Berkeley. And we're very proud to have this based here at the center. And so with that, Ferris, I'd like to invite you to say a few words about yourself, and then perhaps we'll dig into the questions.
Yeah, sounds good. And before I do that, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. You're really modeling the student always principle here at Haas. So even on a Saturday morning, really, really appreciate it. I'm Faris Natour. I lead the Human Rights and Business Initiative at the Center for Responsible Business here at Haas. I joined Haas in that capacity about a year ago. Had been teaching a business and human rights course in our undergraduate program prior to that. And I really spent my whole career trying to embed human rights in business. As you can imagine, that's probably a lifelong occupation for anyone. I started in the investment world, working for one of the big socially responsible investors, Calvert Investments, in Washington, D.C., then joined BSR, Business for Social Responsibility, as a corporate responsibility consultant, spent 10 years there building their human rights practice, and then started my own consultancy, Article 1 Advisors, which works with companies on developing and implementing human rights strategies and management systems, and then working here at Haas to try to embed human rights in the curriculum, in our research work, and we'll talk a lot more about that. So thank you for coming, and we'll have a good discussion.
That's great. And before I ask you a question, I'd like to point out here, we have our names and our Twitter handles are up here, and importantly, although it's the most difficult one to read, our website for the Center for Responsible Business, and that is responsiblebusiness.haas.berkeley.edu. And on that website, you'll see in an area, you'll be able to see Human Rights and Business Initiative. And many of the things that Ferris is offering here, you can go to the website and read more about that, and also see how students are getting involved in these various things. But Ferris, if I could, just to start off with a level-setting question, what do we mean by this? What is business and human rights?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would start by saying this is nothing new, I think, to the business world. Companies starting probably in the 90s have been struggling with and working on working conditions in their supply chains. There was a realization, right, that countries that most companies are sourcing from are either unwilling or unable to develop and enforce laws that protect workers on things like health and safety, anti-slavery and forced labor conditions and things like that. And then in the early 2000s, we saw extractives companies really addressing security and human rights issues. So when there would be a community protest for against a mine or an energy installation, oftentimes the military or the police would come in and use excessive force to break that down. And similarly, human rights organizations then saw that there isn't much use in trying to protest that government or that military for doing that, but there is an ability to use the company at the end of the supply chain or the big brand that's on the oil platform to use their leverage to try to improve the human rights situation there. We then, starting maybe a few years ago, saw the technology companies get really focused on issues like privacy and free expression on the internet, right? We see that continue today. More and more data is collected about all of us and what we do, and we all love the functionality of our smartphones, of our cars that can kind of tell us where they think we are going to go and want to go and when and how to get there, and that's all amazing. But obviously there's great risk involved then with the data being stored somewhere and who is going to have access to it. And there is a human right to privacy. It was written in 1948, so that was pre-internet and pre-smartphones. And so companies now struggle, right, with what they need to do. So these are old issues in a way, but what's new in the last 5 years is we now have a global and universally accepted standard for what corporate responsibility for human rights is and should be, how that's different from governments. I think we're seeing companies see this field as kind of a discipline and a department and something that they need to prioritize. And we see that in all industries, no longer just the apparel and toy companies or the technology companies or the extractives industries, but really companies in all sectors understanding and trying to embed respect for human rights.
Yes, and something that I heard you say there that I'd just like to draw out, because you mentioned right to privacy as being something that's enshrined in international treaties in 1948, as far back as that. But it strikes me as that was historically considered a role for government. And is this a new aspect here where business is actually being called upon to respect human rights? There's a role here for business vis-a-vis government, historically speaking?
Yeah, I think so. And on all of the issues, right, we don't want companies replacing government, right? I think if we were to poll you, I don't think a lot of hands would go up asking, do we want companies making our rules and our laws, right? So we do still depend on governments to doing so. But the privacy example is a really good one because government in many ways is maybe the perpetrator in terms of infringing on the right to privacy more often than not. We have this debate in this country and really around the world of what's the right balance between national security, which is also a very important human rights issue, and the privacy of the individual and privacy of communications, right? And companies are, whether they want to or not, they're caught in the middle of that debate, right? When do you, if you get a law enforcement official coming to your door asking for a blogger's information, right? Who is this? Where can we find the person that wrote this? Maybe incitement to violence. The company, if you're working in that company, you would probably say like, oh, it's the police. Let me look it up. Here you go. And that actually happened, right? With Yahoo in 2005, I believe. And it happened in China, and the blogger was blogging about democracy and free Taiwan and things like that. And the person that responded to that request didn't think, I think, much about what to do, because the authorities say, like, well, we can't tell you what this is about, but it's a national security issue. So then that person, that blogger, got sentenced to 10 years in prison. The CEO of Yahoo was hauled in front of Congress here in the US to explain why they're supporting human rights abuses in China. Yes. And I think that company and technology companies in general realized we need to figure out what to do in that situation. And so there is there's a collaborative initiative called the Global Network Initiative that includes Google and Microsoft and Facebook, LinkedIn, Yahoo, and human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights First and others, all working together to develop principles for how to respond to governments maybe not getting the balance quite right between national security and privacy.
So I'm hearing in there, and I'm thinking about this Yahoo employee, what an incredible challenge to be an individual within business to receive these sorts of requests from government, and what do you do with it?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking here as far as how, as I spent a decade in corporate America, MBA, I never received training in what to do in these sorts of situations. So maybe that is a little bit of, well, I'm going to foreshadow here my next question that I want to ask you. So what can Berkeley-Haas do with this initiative? What do we intend to do with this?
I'll tell you a story about a very different audience that I taught this to, because I think it kind of gets at the ultimate challenge that we're trying to address, and that's preschool. So I went to our son's preschool to explain what I do at work, and
I would have liked to see you try to do that.
I'm sure. I can highly recommend.
I have a hard time explaining to my wife what I do at work, so just let alone.
Don't we all? I mean, I was very surprised. You know, if you think about a group of 3 to 5 year olds, basically, they really understood the concept of business, first of all, and they were like, yeah, that's people collaborating to solve a problem or to create something new. And I don't know who works at a company, you're probably thinking, what? Collaboration? That doesn't happen too often in real life. But I think that the theory they got, and they really got human rights as well, right? That this is about respecting other people and treating them like you want to be treated. But where they really got hung up was on, I asked them, like, how, so I go to companies as a consultant, right, and I tried to tell them, you know, in their words, like, don't push people, don't yell at people, treat people with respect. But how do I make sure that they do that when I'm gone, that they continue to understand that those are the rules? And the preschoolers came up with a great idea, which is we can make a sign, and we can put up a sign on the wall that says, don't push other people. And they're exactly right. But then one of them thought, okay, but what if the sign falls down and nobody can see it anymore? And then they're going to start pushing each other again. And then someone had the idea, like, well, we could kind of put a board underneath the wall, so if the sign falls down, you can still have it. And they got hung up on it, and that was, you know, a dead end, basically. And that's what we call the integration challenge, right? How do you get to the state of rights-aware decision-making in companies where anybody, that employee, that poor guy that had to respond to the police knocking down the door, to the person making an order in the sourcing department for, you know, 200,000 shirts by next week because they're flying off the shelves, not realizing that there may be a forced overtime or forced labor component to that order. How do we get everybody in the company to understand the human rights implications of the decisions that they're making? So that's the challenge that we're trying to address, and we can do that in research here at Berkeley by creating the tools and the kind of management systems required to do that, to make informed decisions wherever in the company they get made. In our teaching, right, we can do that by making sure that the next generation of business leaders, again, regardless of where they end up in the company, understand that there may be human rights implications to their decision-making and incorporating them. And as you mentioned, there's nothing more Berkeley, really, than, and Berkeley-Haas than merging human rights and business. And we have an opportunity, I think we have a great platform, a great forum for dialogue and bringing students and faculty and companies, practitioners, human rights defenders together to solve some of these very complex challenges in collaborative ways. So that's kind of how we're setting up the initiative and what we're trying to accomplish over the next few years here.
Well, I think one thing to highlight there is when you say this is so Berkeley, and this is so Berkeley-Haas also, our defining principles mean a lot. And they were, when I had the good opportunity to come to Berkeley, this was a real attracting factor for Berkeley-Haas. It's a different kind of business school. And one of those principles is beyond yourself. So it strikes me we are attracting these kinds of students that care beyond themselves. But then what to actually do, how to actually put that into action is an open question mark. And so with that, it seems to me that you're addressing with this initiative it's in the ethos here, the principles enshrine it, but now we're actually hopefully arming these students and future leaders with some practical tools that they can take out there. And with that, let me ask a question then on that. So I think you're addressing why Berkeley. It makes sense, why Berkeley, but why now? Why this initiative now?
Yeah. No, great question. And I think before I go there, something you mentioned, Robert, is kind of the fact that we're seeing more and more students really picking us, right, and picking Berkeley because these are the issues that they want to work on in business. And I think that's really important to underscore because we haven't, for those of us who've worked in this field, as you have as well for many years, this is a really exciting time because this is happening. And it seems to be not just kind of anecdotal. I did a very unscientific, I have to say, poll of both our new class of MBAs, when at the various functions where we welcome them to campus, and then we had a lot of visitors in the last couple of weeks, prospective students who are applying now, and many of them came to our human rights and business class at the MBA program. And I asked them, right, why are you interested in Berkeley, or what brought you here, or why do you want to apply here? And many, I think that by far the number one answer on that was tacos. Very good, very good Mexican food in the Bay Area. But a distant second, but still.
I didn't
second.
See that coming, Ferris. By the way, that's. Leave the
I
jokes to me, Ferris. Maybe you stick to the.
Exactly, but no, I hope you can enjoy some for those of you who came from out of town. But not really a second. Let's say tied for first, right? Is this idea that we have this responsible business program, and our human rights and business initiative is new, but the Center for Responsible Business has been around for 13, 14 years?
13 years.
So way before it was cool to have something like this at a business school. And so we have students now telling us, and one student in our class who's a prospective student saying, I'm only applying to Haas. And I had a long list of all the usual suspect business schools to apply to, and I knocked them all out because they don't have this kind of program. But that's only one side of the kind of why now question, right? We see this increased interest among students and also human rights advocates realizing we want to work in and through business because that in today's world is a really important lever to advance the human rights agenda. And there are people that are thinking like, should I go to government? Should I go to Human Rights Watch? Or should I work at Twitter or Facebook? And this is really an exciting time. And the other half, and kind of the mirror image of that I'm seeing in my consulting work with companies is that more and more companies realize that they need those kinds of people. And that to be a successful business and to kind of minimize the risks of getting involved in some of these very ugly situations, but also to maximize the positive impact that business can have on a number of human rights. They want to hire MBAs who come with that training. And so for them, what we're hearing from our corporate partners like Microsoft and Levi's and Patagonia and others is that they want us to do this work because that is the profile of a person that they need to hire in the future. So so the why now could also be kind of a why not now, or why only now and not a long time ago. But I think the timing is right because of those two trends. And then I think where we can take this is that there is a lot of there's a lot of debate now about human rights in business, but it's still mostly kind of adversarial, and companies kind of tend to be a little bit afraid of human rights advocates and human rights defenders. They tend to be very skeptical of business, and because we can kind of effectively merge the two, the way that we can kind of really significantly, I think, advance this field is by being very practical and focusing on corporate engagement in all of this work, bringing practitioners into the debate from both the human rights side and the business side to make sure that the research that we put out, we're working on a big program right now on the financial materiality of human rights management systems, so that will be an important tool for companies to use to say, or for individuals in companies to tell their boss, look, you need to give me more money. This is actually good for our business. We can only create kind of useful research if we bring the practical side into it. And I think that's what has been missing, and that's kind of a big part of the why now for us. But if I can, I'd love to ask you a question back in a way, because you've been working in this field, and I think you've been working with very different hats on, right? Working in a kind of mainstream part of a company and still kind of touching on these issues, working as an academic, doing a lot of research, and then running this center here. But my question would be kind of the global dimension of this, right? From your work, you do a lot of work in Europe as well, and as here. Is there a big difference between how these issues are perceived and really sustainability in general in the US versus Europe or other parts of the world?
Yeah, one major difference that I've seen, and now I'll speak in gross generalizations, and particularly in Europe, I'll focus on Scandinavia, and that's where I've spent the better part of the last decade. Most recently coming from the Copenhagen Business School, where I maintain a professorship, and so I get back there quite often. And what I found, and now I'll speak in generalizing the United States as a whole, but then I'm going to put a little circle around Berkeley as something kind of special. A difference that I've seen is that in a US business context, issues of human rights or other sustainability, social responsibility type issues are oftentimes the business case for making them is necessary from the very beginning. So if an employee raised and said, like I did when I used to work with IBM and then with Boston Scientific, two fairly large corporations, and I worked in supply chain for a period of time, and I said, I think that we should consider embracing some of these United Nations principles for human rights in our supply chain selection procedures. And the immediate question that I got back was, okay, Robert, sounds good, and what's the business case for this? Are we going to sell more product? Are we going to have a stronger supply chain that's more robust, and these sorts of things? What I found a difference in Scandinavia, for example, in some of the business ethic or some of the training in the business schools was a bit more on there was a little more of a humanistic bent to it. So starting with it was less of you have to make the business case and more of well, there's a moral case, there's a values case for this. And maybe over the long run, we'll realize a business case because it's consistent with our values. And I found that to be more pervasive in Scandinavia than in the US business context. And some of that also has to do with time horizons. The US business is very short term. And I really learned that when I was in investor relations. I mean, we're talking about 3-month increments. It's very tough to make a business case for human rights considerations within 3 months. But then back to this little circle around Berkeley, and back to Berkeley-Haas being a very unique business school. Beyond yourself, that's a very values-laden statement. So I see that Berkeley, I happen to draw a lot of inspiration from Scandinavia, and I see a real kinship with Berkeley and what happens here. And now let's fast forward a little bit here, and we're talking about a new generation of business, the people that come here as MBAs and as undergrads. I think that you're going to find being able to make more of a business case for a lot of these considerations on the line of talent attraction and retention. Because people they want to get jazzed about what they're doing, and they want to feel as if they're doing something that actually is contributing to the betterment of society. And that is something that I'm seeing more, where I think we'll increasingly be able to make the business case, not by selling more products or these sorts of things, but actually on talent attraction and retention. And so that's a little bit of some of the comparisons that I would draw out from those experiences.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting, and I think what we see in our consulting work as well, right, is that there is always a need to make the business case, right, and at the same time, I think it's very hard to say, like, generically, what is the business case for human rights. You have to kind of figure out in your company, I think many of you work in business, how does our company prioritize, and how do we make decisions, and what's our culture? Are we very kind of compliance driven, or are we very values driven, or both? And what is the person that I have to make the case to, and how do I convince that person that this matters? And I think one kind of trend that I've seen over the course of my career is that it used to be all about the business case, and now increasingly, you start kind of getting yelled at by your clients if you too forcefully make the business case, because then they feel like you think that they wouldn't do this, they wouldn't respect human rights if it wasn't good for business, right? And so you do start to see a real shift towards kind of this moral imperative that, of course we would respect human rights. It's, why wouldn't we? And yet, when it comes down to it, and you have to kind of advance specific management systems or get resources to do a human rights assessment, you do still have to do the business case. And I tend to agree that the short-termism, especially here in the U.S., can be a real challenge.
Yeah, and let me pick up on that, because this also, I think, can speak to something that's a little bit different about what we're trying to do here at Berkeley-Haas with the Human Rights in Business Initiative vis-a-vis other leading business schools in the States. And that is to say that most business schools have a business ethics class that one can take. And I took one when I was in MBA some decade plus ago, and it was very important for me. But it made that moral case. And the thing that I fell short of doing, it made the case of I should care about people in the supply chain. But it didn't tell me how I can do that. And so we're talking here about some of the things, some of the tools that we can arm our students with, as far as, okay, you want to make the moral case for respecting people's human rights, we'll do that, but now what do you actually do about that? Yeah. So with that as a segue here, could you talk a bit about what are some of the specific activities? You hinted at a couple here with the materiality thing, but what are some of the specific activities that are part of this initiative?
Yeah. So I think I'll start with the teaching side. So we have a course on human rights in business, both in the undergrad program and then a new one in the MBA program as well. And the way we're structuring that is, again, to try to merge the practical with the academic. So we want to give the students a real good and strong foundation in the theory of human rights and in the various ways that business can and is impacted by this agenda. But then we bring a series of guest lecturers from the business world, from human rights organizations, people who have human rights in their title, who would work at companies like Qualcomm or Microsoft or many others. And it's not always the usual suspects too. Monsanto, which is a very polarizing company, they have a big human rights department, and that's often an eye-opener. So we want to kind of show students too that there's a career field here, but regardless of where you are in the company, you will be exposed to this, and you will have to know what to do in that situation. We, on the research side, I've mentioned our work on the financial materiality of human rights management, and there is, you can. If you look for the business case kind of information that's out there, there's a lot of research out there that ties negative events to in the area of human rights to the company's share price, right? So let's say there's a big protest, or a factory fire, there can be a negative impact on the company's share price evaluation. What hasn't been demonstrated yet, and what we're focusing on here, is the positive correlation, right? The fact that companies who have robust human rights management systems outperform their peers. That's what our kind of flagship research initiative will try to do, and we're working together on this with our law school here at Berkeley, with the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, and with University of Manchester Business School, and we're bringing together investors and investor relations people, human rights experts, to try to figure this out. And as you can imagine, data availability is quite a challenge. So this may be a longer-term venture for us. Now we have data available, but it doesn't go very far back. And then on the convening side, I'll give one example where one of the really hot topics right now in business and human rights is the role of business in protecting human rights defenders, including those that may advocate against those companies. And we feel like there's really kind of untapped potential in using the power of business to help protect human rights defenders who are really under threat and under a lot of persecution in many parts of the world. And you see companies responding to that. Adidas, the clothing and shoe company, has just adopted a policy on human rights defenders. And there's a very high-profile case of Tiffany's, the jewelry company, coming to the defense of a human rights advocate who had accused Tiffany's and other diamond users, I guess, and companies of contributing to human rights abuses in the resource extraction phase. And they very vocally kind of told the government to let this guy go, essentially, and that was the advocacy that worked and convinced the government, because that industry is pretty important to the diamond trade and the resources in that country. So what we feel like we can do here is bring companies and human rights defenders together and figure out what business can do to help support them, to help strengthen rule of law and civil society, which ultimately is good for business, right? It's a more stable operating environment. You don't want to work, sometimes you have to, but you don't always want to work in countries that have weak rule of law, that have no civil society. So mutual interests there, and yet not yet a platform to kind of bring this all together. And that's what we'll try to do here. I'll give one more example if I can, because we see another major hot topic that's evolving very quickly, and that is big data and artificial intelligence. We are probably, we will have a very different conversation 5 years from now about the human rights impacts of business, when we're thinking about the debate we're having right now about the rights that Uber drivers have. Are they employees? Are they contractors? What's the responsibility of a company like Uber or Lyft? Are they right in saying we're just a platform, we're just bringing two people together to do business? Or do they have a responsibility of an employer? 5 years from now, they won't have any drivers anymore, and they'll be self-driving cars. And what does that do to the human rights of the people that are driving Ubers and Lyfts right now? So we want to help tackle that issue and other issues related to human rights and artificial intelligence. And we'll put together a major event on this. It's a little early to talk details about this, but look out for lots of exciting news coming in that area of the work as well.
So I hear it's can serve as an important forum for these conversations that otherwise may not have a forum. And in Berkeley-Haas, we can really demonstrate a real leadership position. And with that, let me give the audience a forewarning here. In a moment, we're going to open up to questions and comments from you. So please, would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives and questions that you might have about this. I do want to highlight one thing that you drew out, Ferris, because you said that we're collaborating with a law school here and a number of other colleges across this great university. And so part of this initiative also is to really enact the Berkeley-Haas strategy that Dean Lyons laid out. That is the fundamental pillar of this. The first pillar is for Berkeley-Haas to draw upon the strengths of UC Berkeley, of this great institution. And I think that's something that is so important, and here we are enacting that strategy through the Human Rights in Business Initiative, because I would argue far too often across U.S. business schools, there's effectively a wall around the business school. And here we're trying to tear down that wall and really draw on these great strengths of this university.
Not actually tearing down any walls, though. Right?
Not what this is a metaphor, Ferris.
Good.
You know, this is your second attempt at a joke here. Maybe by the third, though,
They'll laugh.
well, there we go. They have a very kind person right there, Ferris. I presume that you're a relative of Ferris, perhaps.
Perfect.
No.
Thank you. You're very welcome to join the family.
I'm gonna ask you about my final question here, Ferris, before we open up, will be along the lines of how people can get involved, and particularly the alumni can get involved here. And before I pose that specific question, I do want to raise for everyone here, you're all invited. I will hold periodic coffee with the CRB, Coffee with the Center for Responsible Business. Every about 2 weeks we do this. It's just effectively an open office hours. And if you just go to that website, responsiblebusiness.haas.berkeley.edu, irrespective of your affiliation, the only requirement is that you have an interest in having a conversation and maybe a cup of coffee or tea. So please check out the website and come to a coffee with the CRB. That's one thing that alumni are also very much invited to do, and we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on what we're up to. And with that, Ferris, then specifically, how can alumni potentially get involved with this initiative?
Yeah. There's a number of different ways. I think one very important one is you already mentioned, right? Whenever you're in town, let us know and come visit us and hear what we're doing. But there's ways to really get involved in the activities as well. If you do work on these issues, or maybe if you kind of know why this is difficult to do in the company that you work in, or in the work that you do in general. And if you're interested to talk to our students about that, let me know. And as I mentioned, we try to bring practitioners in front of our students in various ways that can happen in class, that can happen outside of class. Just get in touch, and we'd love to kind of make that connection and make sure our students benefit from all of your experience. Same for our research. If you find any of the research topics interesting, if you are happening to sit on a big pile of relevant data on human rights management at companies, do let us know. But there's ways to get involved in your professional capacities, but also in your personal capacity. We have some volunteers already that are helping us organize our events and suggest speakers that would be really helpful for our students and faculty to hear from. And then, of course, if we are a self-funded center, so if your company has a human rights program, or if they have an academic relations program, or if they have a corporate foundation, do introduce us to your colleagues in those departments, and we'd love to tee up a conversation there. We have a number of corporate partners. We have a foundation partner as well. And kind of our ability to grow this agenda and also to export it to other business schools very much depends on that kind of funding. So yeah, that's I think how you can help us. And if you feel like we can help you in any way, do let us know as well. I think, as I mentioned, while much more companies now have human rights managers, human rights directors in the company than they used to, this still and always will have to be everybody's responsibility in the company. So when you go back to work, think about, what are the human rights implications of our business and our company or our organization, and who's responsible for them? What do we do? Do we have a human rights policy? Do I like what's in it? You can contribute in that way. And many of my clients on the consulting side started that way. They were in a completely different function. in their company, and they kept being the squeaky wheel so that when the company realized we need a human rights leader, it was obvious who would be the choice internally there. So yeah, get involved, and we'd love to hear from all of you. And I think our contact info, you can find us on Twitter. My email is Faris Natour at berkeley.edu, and we'll have business cards and all of that stuff if you want to get involved.
Yeah. And please, if individuals with comments, questions, if you could make your way to the microphones, please. And as you're doing that, I'll mention that website. Please do go to it, sign up for our contact list, because one additional way you can get involved is to come to our events. And we will have a human rights and business focused speaker series event this fall. It's called the Peterson Speaker Series, and it's open to the public. We serve lunch. It's free, and it's quite nice. And there'll certainly be a human rights and business one. So please, you'll find all that information on our website. And I would suggest if we can do a bouncing back and forth, we could start right here, giving the lines a little bit longer. And
okay,
please,
all
and if
right.
you'd be so kind, if you would say who you are, and then,
My name is Bart Young, and I am Berkeley-Haas BS 74, MBA 76. And I was a disciple of David Ocker, and I'm in the branding business. So I see this as a fantastic branding opportunity. We live in an age where the social reviews such as Yelp, NPS scores, Glassdoor are very important. People spend a lot of money to improve them or change them. Is there an opportunity, and you mentioned it in the beginning that you're working on a score, but to have a Berkeley-Haas business responsibility score, which could be an international standard and bring a lot of attention to this business school, given that you've been in this for longer than anyone, is from what I hear. So is that in your thinking, or is it possible?
So in ascribing a score to companies?
Branding the score.
Branding the score.
Creating the score, and all the ones I mentioned all come down to a very simple score, like a Yelp score is a 3, not as good as a 5, right? And they boil it down. Usually it's a pretty complex process, but yes, that's my question. Is there potential to brand a business responsibility score? And are you thinking about that at all?
Well, if I could ask Ferris, from a company perspective, you could talk about some of the attempts to
try to do that. Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Thank you so much. And I think getting consumers to make decisions, purchasing decisions based on this stuff is in many ways the holy grail of this work, right? And we haven't kind of quite unlocked it. And a kind of simple score and rating that reflects a company's performance on human rights and business, but also sustainability more broadly, I think would go a long ways towards that, because we keep hearing, right, that in surveys, consumers say, yes, I would be willing to pay more, but when they're in the store, for various reasons, they don't really vote with their wallet, I guess, and lack of access to information and comparability makes that really difficult. I think there is one example of this which Berkeley was very strongly involved in through Professor Dara O'Rourke, who co-founded, I believe, something called Good Guide, and that is a rating system for sustainability that spans, I think, the environmental and the social criteria. And is covering a number of different sectors. I think it started with cosmetics and went from there. So that's a good attempt. I think it was mostly kind of marketed at big retailers to use to help with purchasing decisions for their consumers. The reason I think we don't have something that is kind of all-encompassing is that when you look at the very specific labels that get at one aspect of sustainability, like Energy Star would be a good example for a product label, or the fair trade label that gets at human rights conditions in usually agriculture, that they're very meaningful ratings, but they are very, very hard to do for just one aspect of this. And then we would love to, I think that the short answer really would be, we would love to do this, and we feel like Berkeley is very well suited to do it, but it would be a ton of work we'd need a ton of people and some company that's super committed to it and funding the whole thing.
And let me offer one just to highlight on that. The Good Guide is a great thing to check out, as Ferris said, and you can get it on your smartphone. It's an app, and you can then scan something when you're at Target or whatever retailer you happen to be, a pair of diapers, and it will have an environmental, a social, and then a health and safety number that comes from that, and it's very much a product of Berkeley. Yeah. And the other area would be in the development of a thing called the Higg Index, which is attempting to do a 0 to 100 score, where every piece of apparel that you buy will have this score that sums up, and it would include human rights in there. And a very complex, challenging issue, of course, but to your point, we need to be able to communicate this in a simple way, and therein lies an opportunity and a challenge, all rolled into one. Thank you very much for that.
Very much.
If I could I ask that we grab two questions at once, perhaps, will you be so kind as to pose your question, then we'll come back here and have your question, because I'm just thinking in the interest of time, we'd love to be able to get, if we can, all the questions.
Okay, let's get started here. And I'm going to ask my question right now.
Please.
I apologize. I feel completely ignorant in this field. It's relatively new. My name is Rick Reeder, old alum. I'm having a hard time grappling with this issue. What are the top 3 human rights issues that affect businesses? How do they affect businesses? Are these the same human rights that are in the draw to men, the UN and the U.S. Constitution? You know, I've heard a lot of generalities, but can we get some specifics on what these are and what the issues are for business and what does business need to do about them?
Excellent. Thank you for that. So, Ferris, we're going to hold that in mind. So the top 3 issues, to get very specific here. Thank you for that.
Hi, my name is Franziska Radiker. I'm a Haas MBA 95. And tailing into what my predecessor asked, the synergies with sustainability, because I think there are a lot of same issues around not only making the business case for risk reduction, but also looking at the positive opportunities. I know that within the Center for Responsible Business, there's also a whole branch looking at environmental sustainability. Maybe there's a way of thinking of a healthy environment as part of human rights. I was wondering what you are doing internally to bring these two together and maybe even tie in terms of the overall campus with the power maybe of the media with working with the School of Journalism. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those questions. Ferris, would you mind offering a response?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. And on the kind of 3 priorities question, I think that's a really good one. It's important to give some specific examples here. The overall universe of potentially relevant human rights issues for business is exactly the same as the international human rights framework. There is actually a list of recognized human rights. It's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Again, 1948, so maybe continuously being kind of updated or evolving. But I would say the issues that we most frequently see in our work with business, one is human trafficking and modern slavery. So there's a human right to be free from slavery, and we have more people in slavery today than we had at any point in the history of the world. Working in horrible conditions, in illegal subcontracting in the apparel sector in Bangladesh, in the electronics factories in Malaysia, in the mines for rare earths and minerals in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So almost all of the products that we use today are exposed to the risk of having human trafficking, trafficking of migrant workers for the purpose of forced labor in their supply chain. So I think far and away that is the top priority issue right now for business. It is for regulators. There are new laws in the UK, here in California, and elsewhere in the world that try to get businesses to take control of this issue in their supply chain. I think a second one I would mention is, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is the human right to privacy in the information age and in the age of big data. There is a real responsibility that companies that collect and use data about you personally, that they steward that data in a way and protect it from illegal or illegitimate access. So while it doesn't seem like it's a big deal here in Berkeley, if you are a human rights advocate in, let's say, Bahrain, or in Saudi Arabia, and you try to improve human rights protections in that country, it's very important that you have a way to communicate with other human rights advocates that isn't exposed to potential, overreach by the government and resulting persecution. So that I mentioned this as a priority because that has been a priority issue for technology and internet companies, but it's now increasingly becoming one for all companies. When you have a smart fridge at home and a car that collects a lot of data and so forth.
And with that, just to also draw it back home more locally, the potential for that data to get in the hands of insurance companies and the actuarians and to use that data to price your premiums for insurance is something that is you could see them salivating, the actuarians, over this kind of data, but where the right to privacy would say, no, you should not have data to how often I open up my refrigerator, and that should not affect the premium of my insurance. And increasingly, as this data is being amassed on all of us, and companies have the ability to acquire it, that opens up a lot of human rights, broadly speaking, issues right here in the U.S.
Exactly. And then the third one, real quick, I would say is non-discrimination. So there's a right to not be discriminated against, and we don't have to dwell on this because we all know that we are not there yet by any stretch. There are big issues here in Silicon Valley on equal pay, which is also a human right, equal pay for equal work. And there's a great event coming up here at Berkeley at an institute called Citrus, which is on information technology and human rights issues on women in technology and what companies can do to help create a more equal balance there. So that is an issue that I think whether it's gender diversity or in inclusion or kind of non-discrimination along ethnic or racial criteria, I think that's something that all companies are still struggling with. They don't always use human rights terms to frame those challenges, but they are critical human rights issues. And then Franziska, for your question on kind of the integration with the broader sustainability agenda, I think one thing that we're really keen on is to make sure that we're well integrated with the work that's going on throughout campus, and we do that kind of at the institutional level by partnering on almost everything we do with other institutions that are like-minded, that advance this agenda from a different vantage point. But we're also doing it with our students. We have in our classes students from the School of Journalism, from the law school, from the multidisciplinary Masters in Development program, and we really want them in our class because they bring a perspective that our students can learn from, and we feel like our MBA students can help them better understand business. So we want to kind of foster that multidisciplinary interaction as soon as possible. And the issues, you could argue that every environmental issue is a human rights issue and the other way around, and that's certainly true for climate change. We always tactically and practically have to think about when is the human rights lens and the human rights framework a useful rather than a distracting tool to make progress on climate change, for example. And there's no question that there's major human rights implications in both adaptation and mitigation in the area of climate change. But sometimes, it's not the easiest framework to use to make progress quickly there.
And to add one thing on here where we're working to cut across traditional considerations for sustainability, we're very proud of our legacy here at Berkeley-Haas in sustainable investing in finance. And many of you know we have the world's first and largest SRI, socially responsible investment fund, that is completely student managed, student principles. HSRIF is what we call it. Ferris is working with HSRIF, will be a guest lecturer in here, and trying to say how do we feed in considerations for human rights and using materiality considerations of human rights, and how can that help to inform our investment making decisions in sustainable investing. And so this is definitely an effort that we have to try to infuse within existing programs that we have and strengthen them here at Berkeley-Haas. I'm very mindful of the time, and realistically, if we could do the question here and the question here, and I forgive if we can't get to the rest, but Ferris and I will be up here afterwards also, and I do invite you to a coffee with the CRB. But if we could have a question, we'll go up here first, and then your question, and then we'll respond. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much. It's so refreshing to be able to hear these kinds of topics here in the auditorium. I can't even imagine having executive directors and directors of these topics, and now you guys are here. So, I mean, first and foremost, Jason Kibbe with Pact Apparel. I mean, an amazing example of what Haas has been able to produce into the world. And on the human rights front, Verite has done amazing work in ensuring that there is a business solution to human rights in countries outside of the US. I'm wondering, has that kind of data filtered through here or any other organizations to really be able to, further, I guess, hone the business case for why to invest in that?
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
And then please, if we could.
Oh, thank you. I'll make it brief. My family and I have 5 members that went through Berkeley here. I just saw my daughter walk in a little while ago from master's degree in teaching down the road. My wife with a master's degree from Haas here a few years ago, and I with a bachelor's and master's from up the street at Clary Hall of Electrical Engineering on the other side of the construction. My wife and I had the very honored, fortunate meeting with your Dean, Tom Campbell, several years ago at one of these presentations, and were he here right now, there was going to be a question I would love to ask him, but I guess the panel maybe will suffice. We all walked away from the presidential candidate debates last week with mixed feelings. I'm sure the peculiarities and persona of the candidates are personal to all of us, but my question has to do with more of the parties they represent. And how would you look upon the advancement of human rights in business being more suited for one of those parties or the other, if that's possible? And as with Paul Ryan, you have 10 seconds to decide which, and maybe 20 seconds to decide why.
Well, that's something. Ferris is a German national, so maybe I'll kick the political question over to Ferris, given that. But if I could, a quick response to that first one, and then also Ferris on the second, because I think the fact that we're in the middle of a political season is very much has to do with this full agenda here. Yeah. But if I could respond first to the good comment here, and you referenced Jason Kibbe, who's a proud Haas alum, and I'm very grateful to have gotten to know him in my role here. And now he's the CEO of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. And how do we infuse the work that he and his organizations are doing here? Well, the very good question about the branding and the scoring. Sustainable Apparel Coalition is behind this thing called the Higg Index. They're working very hard to put numbers to these very nebulous and complex sorts of issues and boil it down in a simple number so that others can use it, so that consumers can draw from it, so that perhaps the investment community can also draw from it. So we're very much tied in with Jason, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and now Patagonia, who's one of the founders of Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and Levi's, and we're all part of the same community. And that's something that I think it's also a testament to the importance of a strong alumni network from whom we draw, because Jason's out there really pushing the forefront of this. And Ferris, if I could do the proverbial punt of the political question to you, could you offer a reflection or two on that?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a good and very timely question. I will not get too much into the politics, but I will offer. I know it's a very frustrating experience and especially coming from a European system of government and politics. To see kind of the very polarizing debates. The silver lining to me is that there is a number of human rights issues in that debate, and that wasn't always the case, right? We're talking about a living wage. That used to be a phrase that we couldn't utter with business, and now it's kind of a central part of that when you do dig down into the policy positions, a key to kind of differentiator between the candidates. And you see that same thing on equal pay. Both candidates actually have a maternity leave and flexible workplace policy. So human rights are actually kind of very central, and business and human rights issues very central to the agenda. But what I will focus on, and that's maybe a good close here too, is that we are seeing in our work with business, whether it's here at Haas or through my consulting work, whenever we talk to stakeholders to ask, like, what do you expect from business and how do you define business leadership today? The fact that government and kind of the very polarizing, political landscape here has rendered government less effective, let's say, in advancing this agenda. There's an increasing call to business to be vocal leaders and advocates for human rights. And you see business responding to that expectation. One example is North Carolina, right? And the law there that discriminates against LGBTQ individuals, and business very forcefully saying we have human rights policies, we respect human rights, we feel like we cannot do business in an environment that is discriminatory. And you see the NBA pulling the All-Star game out of that state. We saw similar situation in Indiana last year. So vocal leadership for human rights is what people expect from business in this climate and in this environment, and that's only going to continue, because I think regardless of how the election will come out, the polarizing situation and kind of the lack of getting things done is not going to go away anytime soon.
Well, I want to say on behalf of Ferris and myself, this has been an honor and a privilege to spend some time with you today, and thank you so very much for showing up this morning on homecoming morning and engaging with us. And please come to our website and come to a coffee with the CRB if you're so inclined. And I should say, go Bears!
Exactly, go Bears. Thank you.